us to get to introduce our speaker tonight. And Chip comes to us from Destin, Florida. I go to a convention. I have gone to the convention over there. Beautiful place, great convention. Gulf Coast, something. I can't remember. Anyway, it's a great convention, and it's held over Valentine's Day, the weekend of Valentine's Day. So if you're ever in that area, it's a beautiful venue. Anyway, Chip's going to tell us his experience, strength, and hope tonight, and how he got here, why he's staying, and how he made his connection to God. And I don't know what else, but I'm anxious to hear his story. So welcome, Chip. Yours.
Recording in progress.
Thank you, Jeannie. My name's Chip. I'm an alcoholic. Hello to all my friends. Thanks for keeping this great group alive. I love Zoom. And hey, Stephen, how you doing? I love Zoom. I'll tell you, it saved my life, and I hope I can get to that part of it and not forget to talk about Zoom and the people that are still doing Zoom. But the world came to a close rapidly, and AA kicked into turbocharges, and they embraced this thing called Zoom, and then all of a sudden now it's changed back to hybrid meetings, and we're still having meetings all around the world, and I think it's, I just left my sponsor. My sponsor is Tim Highland up in Louisville, Kentucky, and I was we do a big book meeting every Wednesday night, and so I just left that big book meeting and threw my coat on and ran over in here. So I've got a home group. My home group is Busters for Sobriety in the little fishing village of Destin. We still have a Zoom meeting. They call it Busters at Home. And then we have our face-to-face meetings. My sponsor's Tim. He's got 34 years sober. He's got a sponsor. When Don Majors just passed away, he ran quickly and got Bush from Canada to be his sponsor. And I know that some of y'all know Butch. I sponsor guys from on Monday night. I gave my guy a 36-year medallion. So I sponsor guys from 36 years down to 2 years, and a few sprinkled in between there. But I think the neatest thing is that the guy with 36 years texts me or calls me every single day, and the people with a couple of years, he ain't like pulling teeth. Please call me. So, but he's a dedicated sponsee, and that's what I like, because better than being a sponsor or being sponsored, the greatest thing that I can be is sponsorable. So people would say, at 36 years, you still need a sponsor. And I'm going, oh yeah, just ask anybody around me. So it's I also go to men's retreats because I love going to men's retreats. Tim started one 21 years ago. And it's in typical alcoholic fashion. They call it Kentucky Man to Man, and your aircraft lands in Louisville, Kentucky. They take you across the river into Indiana to a monastery, but they still refuse to change the name. It's still called Kentucky Man to Man. He said, well, that's where you landed. And it's 150 guys. And I also go to the Central Florida Men's Retreat, which is 250 guys. We always say it's 250 hairy-legged guys talking about AA, spirituality, sponsorship, and God with no perfume, no distraction, right? So, because I love doing that, and a bunch of the people I hang out with love doing that. So I want to say this about sponsorship before I get into what it was like stuff. I believe in sponsorship because at 33 years sober, I had one sponsor for 28 years, and he's like my best friend now. But he was my sponsor until I moved to the beach in Destin. And then I got another sponsor, Jerry Wills. And Jerry was my sponsor for 5 years, and they ended up with a terminal lung disease. And he prepared all his guys, all 15 of his guys, and said, be ready. I'm not going to make it much longer. So we did our preparation, our due diligence. And I was standing with my original sponsor at the at your Mississippi Old Timers Convention. It had moved from Jackson to Pearl, right? So I'm standing there with all these other people, and the phone rings, and my beautiful Al-Anon wife, with 34 years in Al-Anon, called me up. And she said, honey, I just didn't want you to see it on Facebook. It's all over Facebook. And I said, oh, he just passed away. She said, yeah. I said, thank you. And I hung up the phone and I dialed Tim on speed dial. And I told him, I said, Jerry had just passed, so would you please be my sponsor officially? And he said, yeah, I'll be glad to carry you, continue carrying you on the road that Jerry had you on. Now, here's where it got important. He says, Chip, I think that is the reason that you called me. I said, yeah, because I'm 33 years sober and I don't go without a sponsor. I've never gone without a sponsor. He said, no. He said, I think that there's a reason that you called me. And I said, why? He said, Chip, he said, I really believe that right now I need you a whole lot more than you need me. And what I didn't realize was that his wife had gone back into cancer and she only had a couple of weeks left to live. And so Gail left us, and I'd met her a long time ago. We were speaking at Crested Butte, Colorado, a big family conference, and it shook me when he said that, and I was about to learn all about that because I learned different stuff from every different sponsor, right? So he said he'd be glad to carry me on the journey. Then he told me about that. Why is it that why don't we tell our stories? Why can't we just memorize the big book? You know, people talk about the first 164 pages. I don't know if you've heard it in your time as sobriety, but some people will say that the program of recovery is contained within the first 164 pages. The rest of those stories are nothing but entertainment. And I'm like, God, thank God it's not entertainment. So it's why do we tell our stories? Everybody has a story. This is just my turn to tell mine. But anybody can get up there and tell their story, right? So why are we supposed to do that? Because in the big book, it says, we hope that you may pause in reading one of the 44 personal stories and think, yes, that's happened to me. Or more important, yes, I felt like that. Or most important, yeah, I believe that this program can work for me. So what are we supposed to do when you get up there to the podium and you're privileged, somebody asks you to share? I've heard a lot of different stories, and but here's what Bill Wilson said. I'm a big book guy, right? In the big book, on page 29, because I have my sticky notes, I can't remember everything. It says, Bill gives us directions on what we're supposed to do. And Jeannie already said it, right? Each individual in the personal story describes in his own language and from his own point of view the way he established his relationship with God. It doesn't say anything about puking. It doesn't say anything about arrest records, right? Or how many times he'd been married. I'd give a whole lot of different stories on that. So, but what they say is how we established a relationship with God. So at 36 years sober, that's what I realized. If we have anybody that's kind of new, just the price of admission has already been paid. You don't have to worry about any price of admission. You get a cup of coffee, you come all the way in, you sit all the way down. And as I got sober on speaker meetings, I had to chase down speaker meetings in 1987 because they were beginning to fade away to the ever popular open discussion meetings, right? But the neatest thing here is that the highest rank that you can get is sober, not speaker, because all it is just a story, right? So I'm a retired Air Force guy. I retired in 1994 with 20 years, 10 months, and 4 days of service. The last 7 years of that was sober, thank God. So I retired in 1994 and I opened up a construction business, which I still have today for 4 more months, and I am officially retiring for the 3rd time. And so I have this business, and we've been operating this business now for 30 years, and Angie and I get to live in Destin, Florida, in the Redneck Riviera, and we often say that this is a place, we get to live in a place where people often dream about visiting one day. And it's and the greatest thing is that in 4 months from now, I'll be 70, and that's it. I'm filing Social Security. I done warned all my contractors. I'm not faking it this time. 10 years ago, I retired, and then I came back 9 months later. So anyhow, but I was raised the son of a naval officer that used to be enlisted. So we traveled the world while I was a Navy dependent. All my teenage years are like everything else was spent on naval bases. So in my teenage years, I was either in Key West or I was in Cuba, in Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. I graduated high school in Guantanamo Bay, Cuba in 1972. There's not much to do when you got 7 square miles of barbed wire and communists on the other side of the barbed wire. So I lived in a very pristine world, and Key West is the same way. It's 7 square miles of an island. And so I had this pristine childhood that I never needed for anything. And my dad was a hardworking guy born in 1928. He said, I'll provide everything that you need, but if you want anything different, you go work for it. And so I was the guy, the alcoholic in training, that had the paper route. Now I'm not only going to deliver your paper. I got a front basket. That baby is full of papers. I'm driving by and I'm throwing the newspaper. I got a string tied to the back end of the bicycle and it's pulling a lawnmower, right? So I got a gas can on the handlebar. So I'm not only going to deliver your paper, I'm going to stop and cut your grass and parlay the invoice at the same time, right? Because I'm going to beg, more is better, more is better. I didn't realize that was going to be my downfall later on, right? I had the high school drinking stuff, and I was just drinking like everybody else. Didn't see anything different. In 1973, I graduated high school in 72 and started my apprenticeship program for carpentry overseas with an overseas construction company there in Cuba. So I got my apprenticeship in 1973. Dad retired. We moved out of Cuba, and he moved down to Fort Lauderdale. And I took off and said, "Pow! I'm joining the military." And he said, "Son, the Navy's going to get another great Bowdrin." And I said, "Oh no, Dad! I've been in the Navy for 19 years as a dependent. I was the son of the commander, if you know what I mean." And if you remember Woodstock in 1969 with the long flowing hair, the bell-bottom pants and stuff like that, yeah. I had a military-style haircut because my dad was the commander of the base. So he said, I can't let you look like a hippie. I got all these sailors that are, trying to grow their beards. And I said, I'm not a sailor, Dad. I always had this friction with my dad. And in the time that I have been sober and the 5 steps that I have done with other people, I often find it pretty much the same with guys, that we tend to have an issue with our father. And I don't know why that father-son issue goes like that. And dang, if the women sometimes don't seem to have the issue with their mothers. It's just a conflict that was going on. My mother spoiled me to death. My dad was the disciplinarian. And I said, I'm never going to be that way. So when I joined the Air Force, I started on my military drinking style career, untethered, nobody watching over me, didn't have to worry about any consequences. This is 1973. We know we're going to Vietnam, right? So I'm in boot camp. I'm in tech school. So I'm waiting to get my orders to Vietnam because they said, we're all going to go. We're going to start bringing assets back. And all of a sudden my assignment said Tampa, Florida. I said, well, that's not a tropical climate there. And they sent me to Tampa, Florida. So what I did was I ended up, I don't know when it happened, but at some point in time in my drinking, I began to consume way too much alcohol. And Ray Melbaum from California always said that I was either getting drunk or getting off of a drunk. It's just the way that it was, right? And I was starting to have some consequences in the military about my drinking, and they were starting to raise the flag. And so I had to kind of try and tether it down. But so I don't know when I crossed the invisible line from problem drinker to alcoholic, right? And but when I talked to my sponsor, he said, don't worry about that, Chip. If God let you see the invisible line, you would have went and got a pole and tried to pole vault over it, because there was no way I wanted, that was not my goal to become an alcoholic, right? So I would have avoided it at all costs, right? I had a young guy with 2 stripes. I had this quick marriage, right? This girl came up and they told me, they said, hey, if you got a wedding certificate, they'll give you quarters allowance and food allowance. I'm like, I can double my pay. I'm living with her anyhow off base, right? I was living where Sandy Beach ended up retiring at the Towers right there on Bayshore Drive in Tampa. I was living in a little apartment back behind there. So I'm sitting there, I'm going, well, all I got to do is sign a wedding certificate. I'll do that. So we went to the Wee Chapel of Love, where they had the Justice of the Peace. Don't laugh. We went to the Wee Chapel of Love, and the sheriff arrived, right? And I'm going to tell you, the sheriff was not there for me. He was there for her. I had a great picker, right? I was good at picking. And so I can sum up my entire relationship issue the way Bill Wilson said it later, 13 years after I was born. He puts this in at 12 and 12, right? no, I was born 13 years after the 12 and 12. He puts this into 12 and 12 and it says, but it is from our twisted relations with family, friends, and society at large that many of us have suffered the most. We have been especially stupid and stubborn about them. The primary fact that we fail to recognize is our total inability to form a true partnership with another human being. And I was not raised that way. What that meant for me was that if you liked me, I would hurt you. And if you loved me, I would hurt you and hurt you and hurt you until you left. And I don't know where any of that came from. I wasn't raised that way. My parents, I think when Dad passed away a couple of years ago, they had 70 years. I think they celebrated their 70th anniversary. And but I didn't want anybody getting that close to me. It was kind of like handcuffs to me, right? So that's how I went on with this quick marriage at the Wee Chapel of Love. I met wife number 2 when I was in a car chase with wife number 1 chasing us. We were at a biker bar, and this is my soon-to-be wife number 2. And the cops pulled us over, and they said, "What are you doing?" I said, "My wife's back there." Anyhow, that's just the way that I was. I was kind of just like unpredictable, right? In my second marriage, we had 3 children, and these are the 3 children that I dragged to my alcoholism. There was nothing, when I sobered up and took my inventory, there was nothing funny about what I did to that family. I was a tyrant. I was a Tasmanian devil. I was the person I swore I was never going to be. You're going to have star charts, and you're going to have allowance, and you're going to listen to me. You're going to do this and that. I'm going to come home and inspect the house. Blah 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 blah. And I became the person that I swore that I was never going to be. My dad was number 3 on my resentment list, and my mother, who spoiled me, was number 4 on my resentment list. The dichotomy of the tyrant that I never wanted to be and the one that spoiled me to death were 3 and 4, completely opposite. And I couldn't understand that why. I started getting into trouble, and I ended up in emergency rooms, right? So I took 2 trips rapidly in a row to the emergency room, always on a Sunday night. And they would put nitro underneath my tongue. My blood pressure was exploding. I didn't realize what it was called was detoxing, right? On Sunday night, I'm trying to stop the weekend binge because I got to sober up, put on my military uniform, and go to work again in the morning. So I'm trying to, every time I was in the emergency room, it was not because I was drinking. It's because I was not drinking. And I never correlated that with anything, right? The last trip to the emergency room was August the 26th, 1987. They finally locked me up, and I can tell you that I never knew anything about the program of Al-Anon. Never knew anything about AA. But I look back upon, it says our personal adventures before and after disclose 3 pertinent ideas. I can remember when I went to that emergency room for the 3rd time. They got me out of the ambulance. They pushed me into the back room. The doctors and the medics were there with me. I had stuff coming out of every orifice. That's in a general way, right? So they were back there treating me, trying to take care of me. My wife had those 3 little bandits that are in the emergency room. They were 11, 10, and 8 years old. And she is out there yelling at the technician at the desk. And I can hear all that yelling that's going on out there. And these doctors are probing me and sticking stuff in me. And I heard her, and she's yelling at them. She said, "You have got to do something." And they said, "Ma'am, we've got him in the back room." "No, you have got to do something." And she high-pitched voice, right? And then I heard the kids crying and stuff like that. And I'm like, man, what is going on? And then the biggie was, she said, "Here's the deal. He has done this 100 times before, and if you don't stop him, he'll do it 100 times again till he dies." And I didn't realize that was called Al-Anon. See, I thought I only hurt myself. But she started telling them how she would beat on my chest at nighttime when I would stop breathing. And I thought it was sleep apnea. No, I didn't know what sleep apnea was. She was pounding on my chest because I just flatlined and quit breathing. And I learned all this, it used to be hearsay, now it's hearsay. I learned all about this stuff after I sobered up, right? They took my clothes and they put a bracelet on my wrist and labeled me as an alcoholic. And they put foamy slippers on me and a robe and pajamas and took me up to the 4th floor, to the mental ward. And that's where I detoxed. And I had never been to an AA meeting. I had never worked a single step, didn't know what the steps were, but I can tell you what happened is that I was scared to death because I thought I was checking out again and there was going to be nobody beating on my chest if I checked out. So what happened was they put me in the rubber room and I just started crying. I mean, I had an arm full of stripes when I'm at work and a chest full of medals, and here I am in a fetal position crying in the dark. And this guy with 3 stripes was standing there and he said, "Sergeant Bowder, what's the matter?" And I said, "I don't think I'm going to make it through the night." That is a fear that I had never had that I could possibly put into words. I never told anybody that. I didn't think I was going to make it through the night. And here's what he said: "Sergeant Bowder, I will come into this room, open this door every 15 minutes, and I will shine the flashlight, make sure that you're all right." And instantly, I felt relief. And I didn't realize that I had just turned my will and my life over to the care of a 3-striper with a flashlight. I surrendered to this guy. But you asked me later on to work the steps in AA and do a 3rd step and surrender to God. And I'm like, whoa, wait a minute. We got to have answers about all this stuff, right? They kept me there for 10 days. They dragged me to a couple AA meetings and stuff. And I'm just sitting there keeping my mouth shut. The commander came and talked to me. He says, "Chip," he said, "you got 7 years left before you retire. You need to make a decision what you're going to do about this alcohol stuff." It said, "Your career or alcohol, make a choice." And I'm like, God, live a spiritual life or suffer an alcoholic death. But Bill Wilson always gave you opposing answers to the same problem, right? Belly up to the nearest bar stool or try staying sober for 1 year. So I said, I will stay sober and I will never drink again, Commander. That's it. My career is more important than my drinking. But what I could not tell anybody was I could not stand being sober. They're telling me that I'm not going to drink anymore and they're not going to give me any more drugs. And my life's going to become wonderful. And I'm just like screaming out of my skin. It's just I'm like a raw nerve ending and I have no coper anymore. I have nothing to cope with. And now I have to experience life without a coping mechanism. And it scared me to death, right? I went to AA meetings and alcohol was the thing that let me cope. If I did something wrong and I felt guilty, I'd drink enough alcohol. I made way too much of that deal. If I was afraid, I drank alcohol, but I became bulletproof, right? Anything in my life that happened, guilt, remorse, worry, all that, alcohol changed everything in my life. And now I don't have it anymore. And I can't tell anybody I can't stand being sober. So I went to meetings for 6 months, 3 weeks. 6 months and 3 weeks, the commander said, "You've done so good. We're going to fly you out to California with a bunch of troops, and you're going to be the leader. We're going to have a mission out there." And I'm like, "Oh boy!" And I went out to California. Before I went to California, I went and talked to the old timer that got sober in Long Beach, California. He said, "Here's the names and the numbers." He got sober in '66. I'm going to give him a 58-year medallion in September. He was the guy that was my first sponsor, right? And he said, "Call these numbers, make sure that you don't drink." And I flew out there, I made the phone call, made the commitment. "I'll come down off the mountain from Victorville all the way down to Long Beach, and I'll go to your Sunday morning intergroup breakfast." She said, "I'll buy you a ticket." And I said, "Cool." When they were having the speaker meeting, I was in Santa Barbara on the pier drinking. I offered no mental defense against the first drink, and I'm going to tell you why. Because I wasn't sober AA. I wasn't in AA. I was at AA. So I didn't relapse or I didn't slip. How can you go back to somewhere you've never been? I never made any effort at all except just go to meetings, go to meetings, go to meetings. The 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, cha-cha-cha drink. So it's, and they'd say, "What step are you on?" "I'm on the 2nd step, leave me alone." So I didn't even know what the 2nd step was. I just attended meetings. So I came back after drinking for 3 days. 22nd of November, 1987. And I went to the old timer. They flew me back there, back to the Panhandle. And I went to the old timer and I said, "I think I'm going to go in and I'm going to tell the commander what I did. And I'm going to lose my career." I said, "But I don't know. This alcohol thing I am confused about." And he said, "What are you confused about?" I said, "I don't know if I'm an alcoholic or not." And he said, Now we can get somewhere. Now when the honesty starts coming out, it starts to become the three-part: honesty, open-mindedness, and willingness. I had not been honest, I had not been open-minded, and I darn sure wasn't willing. Now I broke the ice, and now I'm honest. I don't know if I'm an alcoholic or not. Now I'm 33 years old, chest full of medals, arm full of stripes. I can't be an alcoholic. I got tangible evidence and a resume. So he said, well, Chip, he said, let me tell you what. He said, so evidently your drinking did not prove you were alcoholic. And I said, no, I'm going to tell you the truth, man. I'm just really not convinced. He said, good. He said, if your drinking did not prove your alcoholism, maybe your sobriety will. And I said, what? Now I'm going to bring out the big book and challenge him. Where is that in the big book? He said, if your drinking did not prove your alcoholism, maybe your sobriety will. And I said, what do you mean by that? And here's how he saved my life. If you're not an alcoholic, sobriety is not going to hurt. But if you are an alcoholic, it's going to get real, it's going to get different, and then it's going to get real different. That's called alcoholism. And I said, well, what do I do? He said, well, do exactly what we do and you'll get exactly what we get. He said, no more just attending meetings, you're going to participate, you're going to join a home group, you're going to do this. And I said, I'm willing to do anything because I got to find out one way or the other, right? See, they told me that 100% of me had to want to stay sober to survive, right? The idea that somehow, someday he could control and enjoy his drinking has to be smashed. And mine wasn't smashed. I still had this little thing in the back of me saying, I don't know if I'm an alcoholic or not, but if it ever gets that bad, man, I'm going to take a drink. I got to have relief, right? But he said, quit. He said, you're focusing on 50-50. He said, why don't you start focusing on 51-49? He said, I just want you to fight for 1%. Don't have to fight for the whole 100% want to be sober. Fight for 1%. The one that takes you off to 50-50 and puts you into, I'll stay sober for 51%. So the deal was that I just went ahead and made this contract with him, right? I said, I need to ask you about it. Okay, I'm not going to drink, but I got these questions I'm going to ask you about, right? He said, what's the question? So then I grabbed the big book because I'm going to stump the sponsor, right? He had 21 years and I had none, right? So I said, okay, let me ask you this. What am I going to do about the job? I'm not so sure the Air Force is going to let me stay in. And here's what he said. Chip, we have this big book, and in the big book is a chapter to the employers. We hope you read it, and if you have any questions, then you come ask me. I said, okay, what am I going to do about that wife? He says, Chip, we have a big book, and in the big book is a chapter to the wives. We hope you read that, and if you have any questions, then you come ask me. I'm like, man, this guy's got one answer on one answer. I said, what do I do about them kids? He says, Chip, love those kids. He said, we have a chapter in the big book called The Family Afterwards. We hope you read it. And if you got questions, you come ask me. I said, man, what am I going to do about God? I was raised in the church. I got this thing about God. It's a barrier. He said, Chip, we have a big book. And in the big book's a chapter called We Agnostics. I'm like, wow. Well, how am I going to find out if I'm really an alcoholic or not? I mean, I need definitions. He said, Chip, we got a big book. And in the big book's a chapter more about alcoholism. He just kept going and going, and I kept asking and asking, how's all this going to come about? We got a chapter 5 in the big book, how it works. Oh, what am I going to do now? How am I going to go about doing that? We got a chapter into action in the big book. And the reason I say that is not to waste time, is to tell you this. My sponsor never told me what to do about my job. He never told me what to do about the wife. He never told me what to do about the kids. He never told me what to do about God. He never told me what to do about the program. What he did was wanted to tell me where the answers lie. And if I would read the big book and I would search for the answers, and if I had questions, then I could come ask him. The deal was he wanted me to read the big book. He had to fast track. He had the Evelyn Wood speed reading course. He had 21 years of experience of how to fix things because he'd seen it happen in all these other people. But he didn't make the attempt to fix me. And that's how I learned Alcoholics Anonymous. Over and over again, reading the big book, listening to cassette tapes, going back and forth to work, doing all that stuff, right? But But the last thing that he cemented in me, he says, we really need to cement this thing about the drinking, right? As far as the alcoholism. So I followed him. I went out to Palm Springs Roundup, 1989. He introduced me to Mac Brewster, got sober with him in 1966. And I said, Mac, when did I become an alcoholic? What was I doing? Where was I at? Who was I married to? What job did I have? And he said, Chip, if you're like me, you became an alcoholic when you quit bragging about how much booze you drank and started lying about how much you really did. And something went in my head. Then I listened to Cliff Roach. Cliff Roach says, I didn't drink for the effect produced by alcohol. I drank for the effect 8 minutes and 40 seconds later. And I knew what he was talking about. When the hammer went down and everything settled down, we're like, yeah. But the one that really got me was I had a lady in my home group that used to get up to the podium all the time. And it never sank in until I heard it when I could hear, as only the dying can hear. Rose got up there and said, alcohol gave me a license to act in an unsociable manner, and excuse it off by saying, I am so sorry. I would have never done that if I hadn't have been drinking. I said that to my children. I said that to the wives, plural. I said that to my parents. I said that to my brother, my sister, all, you know. And I said, well, maybe I was an alcoholic because of the way Dad raised me. And I ran to my brother and sister and I said, I'm trying to find out about all this stuff. I think that's because of the way that I was raised in strict military discipline in the 60s and 70s. And my brother and sister looked at me. My sister's a year older. My brother's 7 years younger. And they go, you realize all three of us were raised by the same parents. You're the only one locked up naked in the nut ward, detoxing from alcohol. We're fine. And that's when I knew the AA bumper sticker. It's not them. And it took away all my excuses and all my thunder. And I started launching off and working the steps. I came up to this thing with a second step. And I said, I don't have this. Everybody talks about they have a problem with God. Well, Burl, the old timer, said, God's not lost. Quit looking for him, right? So in the big book, it says exactly where God is. Deep down inside, that's where we got to go. In the last analysis, that's where he's at. We're going to go deep inside. And the only way we can do that is by working the rest of the steps. So he had me go off and work all the rest of the steps. But I said, I'm going to tell you about this step too. I can take part of it, but not all of it. He said, why? Because I think I'm an intellectual guy, right? I got degrees. So I said, I know what you want me to say. You want me to say that I'm insane. He said, where did you hear that? I said, well, look at the way it's written. Came to believe that the power greater than myself can restore me to sanity. I know what you mean. You want me to say I'm insane. I ain't doing it. He said, where did you think you had to say that you were insane? He said, but by the way, didn't you graduate from a nut ward? I said, well, that was only 10 days. It doesn't count, right? He said, why don't we go back to the big book and let's see what Bill Wilson talked about alcoholic insane. I said, okay. So page 36 down at the bottom, highlighted in pink, it says he had much knowledge about himself as an alcoholic. Yet all reasons for not drinking were easily pushed aside in favor of the foolish idea that he could take whiskey if he only mixed it with milk. Remember Jim the Milkman? 1 ounce of whiskey in a glass of milk, right? Whatever the precise definition of the word may be, we call this plain insanity. I'm like, woo! One paragraph down. The insanely trivial excuse for taking the first drink. Next sentence, the insane idea, 1 out. 1 paragraph. Our justification for spree was insanely insufficient. I said, that's it, I'm done. Don't worry about that anymore. I'll take the step. That's how the sponsor kept pushing the steps into me. I could sit around all day long and try to intellectualize everything, but what he did was just kind of drag me through the steps so that I could change. And I said, why are you dragging me through the steps like that? He said, because I think you're the type of guy that the steps are what you need to cure this drinking thing that you got. And I'm like, where's that at? And he said, it's in the 12 and 12. He said, read the forward to the 12 and 12. And I'm going to paraphrase it. These 12 steps, spiritual in nature, are designed that if practiced as a way of daily life, here it comes, can expel the obsession to drink. And I'm like, what? I thought this is to get the foo-foo stuff, man, to make everything better. He said, Bill Wilson designed these steps to expel the obsession to drink. He said, you think you had to have that in step 1? I said, what about having to be smashed? That's why I love him to death. He didn't try and grind me down and make me, beat me down and pummel me he just basically told me the truth. He said, this is what Bill Wilson wanted you to do, and I think this is the way that I did it, and this is the way that you ought to try and do it. And that's what we did. And I launched off, and I started working the steps. Then I started sponsoring guys. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm starting to get some time. I'll tell you about the first guy I sponsored, because it's crazy, right? He came up and asked me, I thought sponsorship was this. He came up and said, would you be my sponsor? And I had about a year, and I'm like, whoa, me? Hold on. I got to call the old timer. So I called the old timer up, and he said, Chip, he asked you to sponsor him? I said, yeah. He said, he asked you to help him, not heal him. And I said, oh, okay. I thought I was going to take this guy's life in my hands, right? So I run down there the next day. I called the guy up, and I said, you meet me at McDonald's, 7 o'clock in the booth, an hour before the meeting, and we'll talk. I ran down to central office, and I bought every piece of literature I could find off the shelf, and the free stuff, the free pamphlets, right? This guy walked into McDonald's. Even the employees were looking at me, cocking their head like a dog, right? I had the booth, the corner booth, and I had every piece of AA literature displayed like the AA altar, right? So this guy walks in, and he comes in, and he sits down, and he's staring, and all of a sudden he just looked. I said, that's right, man. We're going to do every bit of this stuff. And he's like, good God. I said, yeah, good God. We're going to do it all. And I always said after that, whenever I spoke, I said, you know what? Because of that, I never saw that guy drink again. I never saw him sober again either. I never saw him at all. I gave that guy such an AA enema. He just hauled ass, and I never saw him at a meeting again. Hopefully he never drank again. But the second guy I sponsored, I fell in love with, right? The guy by the name of Tim. And I'm taking him through the step. He did a fifth step. You know, you've heard of it before. That fifth step, that is so honest and in depth. He'll never drink again. Oh my God, I can't believe that was such a great fifth step. I bought him a Gulf Coast Roundup. I bought him a registration to the Gulf Coast Roundup. I said, we'll be in the front row, man. It's like 1990 or something like that. We'll be in the front row. You make sure you come. And next year you buy somebody you sponsor that registration. So I sat there on Friday night. Tim wasn't there. Saturday all day. Tim wasn't there. Called up on the phone. Tim didn't answer the phone. I said, I know what he's doing. He's out trying to chase women or something. So then I said, well, if he ain't going to come Sunday, I'm going to go ahead and get him on Monday Night Big Book Home Group. So I went to Monday Night Big Book Home Group, and his seat was empty, no Tim. And I knew exactly what was going on, and the anger just started rising like that. I can't believe this. So I didn't say nothing to the old timer after that. I ran my car, and I zoomed over to his little cottage. I came down that gravel road. You could hear all the tires coming down. And I had my headlights on that cottage, and I could see that glow from that 25-inch color console. The light, right? And as soon as I turned the lights off in my car, the TV lights went off. And I'm like, oh, you're going to try hiding from me? Me? I went, Tim, open the door. Tim didn't open the door. Fast forward 15 minutes later, I'm about screaming my head off. The neighbors are all upset. I'm like, open the door. And I just started crying. And I just turned around, held my head down, and walked away, got in the car. The lesson came the next day when I went to the old timer. I told him exactly what I did. He said, you beat on his door, and he didn't answer the door, and you knew he was in there. I said, that's right. He said, well, Chip, evidently you took credit for his sobriety, and now you're taking credit for his drinking. And I'm like, I did that? He said, obviously. He said, you don't have the power to get anybody drunk, and you surely don't have the power to get anybody sober. I said, this is just one drunk helping another drunk. You don't establish these cutthroat relationships with people. You just reach out and try to help somebody. And that's where I learned all the sponsorship thing. And that's why I said these are not wrinkles, it's scar tissue from doing it wrong. Learning my lashes. But my life rocketed. I mean, I retired from the military in 94 at 7 years sober. And then I started a construction business. I ended up divorced. I didn't realize it, but I was running to AA meetings, AA conventions. I'm going to Hawaii. I'm going to the Hawaii State Convention. I'm going to Palm Springs. I'm going everywhere, right? And at year 10, I ended up being divorced. And I stayed single, sober, and serene for a couple of years. Ended up dating a girl in my home group. We ended up getting married. It was bulletproof. It was a home group wedding. Sponsor gave her away. absolutely cannot fail. That business got so big and my head got so big that you could have walked past my house. I'm now living next to the lawyers and the doctors in the gated community, right? You hit that garage door button, there's the Corvette. You hit the other garage door button, there's the Mercedes sports car. I am looking good. What nobody saw at midnight was me sitting there trying to keep up with that facade, grinding all those guys of mine to get more. I gotta survive. I'm dying. I ended up with a massive heart attack at the Widowmaker. And I lay there on that slab, and that doctor said, I got to put stents into your heart. You're 98% blocked. So he put these stainless steel stents into my heart. You got to lay awake to do all that stuff. And I'm talking to the guy, right? Local anesthetic. I said, I'm going to find the SOB that caused all this stress. He said, man, you are so stressed out, you have turned your blood to cottage cheese. And I didn't realize stress could do that. He said, you need a total change in lifestyle. So I got off that slab. I got out of the rehab part of it, went back to the house and told the wife we're going to start selling everything off. And I did. 8 months later, I was divorced. She did not like that change in lifestyle. I'm 25 years sober now, third divorce. I'm like, what the heck's wrong with me? What's wrong with me? Remember that part that I read a long time ago here at the beginning of the meeting? It is from our twisted relations with family, friends, and society. I've not changed. I had not changed when it came to relationships. And I had to take an inventory. Basically, he said, I need you to take a crosshair inventory just on relationships, and let's get through this thing. He said, we need you to change. So I went through this process, right? I went all the way back to the steps just on relationships again. And here's what I found out. When I drank, I made alcoholic widows and alcoholic orphans. I was never there. The kids didn't know who I was. I was just out there making money. I had my military job and I had a part-time job doing construction. They never saw me. I'd say, I'll make the money, you take care of the kids and raise those kids. So I made these little alcoholic orphans, and I made the alcoholic wife, or the widows, right? When I got sober, now I'm making AA widows and AA orphans. Daddy's sober, where is he at? I'm still running to Hawaii, running to Palm Springs. They're like, where's Dad? What's changed? Nothing had changed. And at 25 years sober, I changed. I rebooted and I became a better person, different person. And then a year or so later, that's when me and Angie were together at the Flint River Roundup. We'd known each other 15 years. We started talking. We started texting 180 days after the first word. We were married. We'd known each other for 14 years. And that was in 2014. Life was good. I sold the construction business. She retired from the state of Alabama. We were set. We moved to the beach. Everything was good. Not a cloud on the horizon. And then the gauntlet came down. We had sold the business for a lot of money, and all of a sudden they said, nope, we can't do that. We quit. After 9 months, they quit. There'll be no more income from the business at all. So we had to reboot. We had to go back through all this process. That was the time that I had gotten another sponsor. And here's what Jerry asked me. I called him up, and I am angry. I said, it's $1.3 million, man. I'm dying. I told that to Bob Bazans when me and him spoke together one time, and Bob came up and tapped me on the head, and he said, Chip, I lost $10 million. Get off that dang cross. And I'm like, geez, you can't top anybody in AA. I decided I was going to go back to work, start another business up, and that's what I did in 2015. But here's the problem. I had a resentment against the person that tanked that business. It was my own child. I had sold the business to my child, right? And that's where it got really hairy. You see, I'd gone through resentments against people. I'd gone through resentments against places. I'd gone through resentments against people in my home group, but I had never had a resentment against my own child. But for the last 3 or 4 minutes, here's what I want to tell you what he did to me. This is my new sponsor, the one that ended up dying of the lung disease. And Tim is still carrying me on this. How he established his relationship with God. I'm screaming and yelling at Jerry about how they screwed us over for 1.3, and then Jerry stopped me. He said, Chip, stop. He said, I've listened to you for all this time, and I've never heard you mention the word God once. And I said, man, God ain't got nothing to do with what that kid did to me. and I got a resentment, and I cannot forgive her for what she did. And he said, and this is the first time this ever happened. Now I'm 28 years sober now. And here's what he asked me. Tell me about your conception of God. I want to know about your God. And that's the first time anybody ever challenged me. You see, I breezed right through it saying, I've got Catholic school, I got this, I got no problem with God. Remember that second step? No issue with God, issue with insanity. I had issues. I could not connect. And he says, Chip, I think you got a great conception of God, but what you lost is your connection. Two different things, conception, connection. He said, it's like groveling around in the dark when you walk into the room, you're reaching for the light switch. You know it's there, but you cannot find it. You cannot access the power. And I said, man, you're right. I can't shake this thing. It's on me like an octopus. And he said, I think what we need to do is maybe reboot your concept of God a little bit. I said, what are you talking about? He said, let me ask you. And I'm not a computer guy, I'm a construction guy. He says, are you still running on God 8.0? This is 2018 now, or 2016 now. Are you still running on God 8.0? And I'm like, no, that's a computer term, like Windows 8.0 or something. He said, no, God 8.0. He said, all the rest of us upgraded to God 10.0. I said, you did? How can you do that? Hey, you can't do that. It's not in the big book. He said, oh, yes, it is. You got to watch them old timers. And he took me to the page in the big book. For if the alcoholic fails to perfect and enlarge his spiritual life through work and self-sacrifice of others, he cannot surmount the certain trials and the low spots that lie ahead. And he said, Chip, I think you got one hell of a low spot and trial, and you cannot surmount it. And I said, wow. He said, so why don't we do what I did? He said, I'm going to ask you to order some books because I'm not giving you mine, and we're going to go on a search for God. I said, what? He said, we're going to go on a search for God, deep down inside. But what we need to do is we need discipline, spiritual discipline. I said, okay. He said, here's the deal. When you walk outside, everything that you see, I want you to say, thank you, God. Thank you, God, for the leaves. Thank you, God, for the geckos. Thank you, God, for the concrete on the sidewalk. Amanda does it all the time, right? Thank you, God, for this. Thank you, God, for that. And I thought, why am I doing that? He said, we are practicing the presence of God. It's just the drill. Practice, practice. Identify God in everything that you can see in the atoms. They talk about the atoms and the whirling blue. We need to get you back in line with this God thing. And that's what he did. He took me on a 2-year journey. And in the end, I was able to sit there with my daughter and make amends. And the last thing and the biggie is the forgiveness, where I said I couldn't forgive her for what she did. And Jerry just point blank asked me, he said, Chip, are you a hypocrite? I said, no, I bowed up. No, I'm not a hypocrite. He said, you can't forgive your daughter for what she did? I said, no, I mean, it screwed us over big time. He said, let me ask you something. How many meetings have you been to? And I said, thousands. Now I'm 30 years sober. Thousands of years. Thousands of meetings. He said, what do you pray at the end of the meeting? I said, the Lord's Prayer. He said, tell me what you say about forgiveness in the Lord's Prayer. And I'm like, uh-oh. Forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. And I was able to do an inventory. I was able to go to my daughter and make amends after I talked to my sponsor and God about it. I was able to right the wrong. I was able to look at my side of the street where I screwed up the contracts on making never should I have sold my own child that business. It just shouldn't have happened. I didn't realize it at the time, but like Sandy Beach always quoted that part of the book. Oh, let's see, looking at things from a different angle. What page was that on, Sandy? That was on 66. We turned back to the list for it held the key to the future. We were prepared to look at it from an entirely different angle. And that's what sponsors do for me. That's what people like you do for me in Zoom meetings, where I'm able to go around the world and see friends all over the place. Angie and I just got back. What is today? We just got back Thursday or Friday. We went on the Grand European Tour with the Viking Cruise, where we landed in Budapest, and 2 weeks later, we're in Amsterdam, and seeing all God's stuff all the way through all that, and coming back with jet lag, 7-hour time frame difference. Oh boy. But today is good. It's absolutely great. I was with my sponsor today. I was at my home group yesterday. Beth Hartley just had her 36-year birthday today. My home group sits next to me in my home group. Life is good. Coming from a nut ward with a guy with a flashlight to where I am right now is a long journey, but it's just a day at a time with the help of people like you and sponsors like I got, because Tim is a gentle giant and I love him. So thank you all very much.